computer. Well, hi everyone. I'm Skip Tyler, and I got with me today Sam Capitano, and today we're going to be speaking about adoption. Now, if you watched the program last week, we had two ruling elders talked about justification, but this week we got two teaching elders that are going to talk about adoption. I've known Sam for a long time. I guess I first met you about 20 years ago when Marcia and I came to the church and we were in your care group, and
Mhm.
and I was thinking that was just about the time that you were adopting Samantha, or pretty close to that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was in that range of time. We were in between. We had completed Zarina's adoption a few years prior, and then we were gearing up for the next one.
Well, one of the things, I took your class last year with Darlene, but recently I got this book, Adopted for Life by Russell Moore, and I'm the kind of guy that when he talks, I try to be a straight shooter. I don't know if I always am, but I try to be a straight shooter. But when you read Russell Moore's book, if anyone's a straight shooter about adoption, it's him. And there was just so many different things I've read in this book that I thought, man, this adoption is really hard. But the one question that people might be asking right now, since they see you and they know this is a Sunday school class on systematic two on doctrine, are we going to be talking about the doctrine of adoption? Are we going to talk about the real adoption, adopting children? And Russell Moore talks about that in his book. What can you say about that, Sam?
Well, it's really hard not to talk about one without the other. It was really one of my daughters that she was relatively young, and all of my children are adopted, and I could give you more history on that. But this daughter, she couldn't have been, I'm saying like maybe 10, 11 years old, so relatively young. But she says, if adoption exists, then that means that there was a problem that needed to be solved.
Hmm.
And so,
Your daughter came up with that?
yes, I mean, she's so perceptive to make that connection. And so, we'll dig into this as we go along, but adoption, as I like to say, is not a natural act. It's not a natural act. It exists to address tragedy. And the first tragedy that was recorded was in Genesis chapter 3, right? And the Westminster Confession of Faith expresses this in the chapter on the fall of man and sin and the punishment thereof. But the children's rhyme best summarizes it. By Adam's fall, we sinned all, right? So the guilt of Adam's sin is imputed to all mankind, and it comes with it, our corruption in our own nature, and death ultimately. And the scriptures explain this. They say that, Ephesians 2 says we were dead in trespasses and sins. But then what does Paul say? He says that this spirit of death is working in the sons of disobedience. And then he says we, too, we're by nature children of wrath. So it's interesting he uses the term sons and children, because from the perspective of trauma or this tragedy, right, we came from a family that was radically dysfunctional, that had sinned and separated from God, Adam and Eve. But that sin was transferred to us. It was imputed to us, and we've been injured by that fall. So adoption is the rescue, that God's rescue plan to redeem us. I would say the doctrine of adoption is designed by the triune God to address the guilt of my own sin, right, as well as the imputed guilt and the trauma of Adam's rebellion against God.
Let's just look at the actual definition of adoption, and this is from the Westminster Larger Catechism, question 74. And I really like this definition because I think it really does capture what you just said. Adoption is an act of the free grace of God in and for his only Son, Jesus Christ, whereby all those who are justified are received into the number of his children, have his name put upon them, the Spirit of his Son given to them, are under his fatherly care and dispensations, admitted to all the liberties and privileges of the sons of God, made heirs of all the promises and fellow heirs with Christ in glory. And I think, Sam, with my, been in your class last year, that, adoption is an act of free grace, and it comes after we're justified, where God makes us holy. But he doesn't make us holy because we did anything. He makes us only holy through his son's death, and us believing in that, where that righteousness is imputed to us. So we haven't really done anything, but because he loves us, he justified us because we have faith, and now we're received into the number of his children. And I think the great part is that his name's put upon us. And that's almost like what happens in adoption, where your name, I was reading in Russell Moore's book where they adopted two Russian children, and I think they were Sergei, and I can't remember the other child's name, but they ended up becoming Timothy and Benjamin. They put those new names on them, and I thought that was a really, really interesting thought. So, Sam, when you taught this class last year, you had these 4 points of adoption,
Mm.
and I wanted to start with the first one,
Mhm.
and you said the adoption is the basis for my identity in Christ. Now, when I took your class, I had no idea that it was your daughter that pointed out that a tragedy took place for an adoption to happen. I mean, that sounds like something that some theologian wrote in a book, but for a child to understand what is really happening here, and that there was a tragedy that took place. That's a lot of insight on that child's part to really understand that, because I think that that's probably one of the most important things for us to understand in
Mm.
adoption. So if you could kind of expand on this next point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that, we would meet people, and our first, so to back up, all six of my children are mine through adoption. The oldest two are Lisa's through biology, through her first marriage. I was able to adopt them really by God's grace and the kindness of her ex-husband. I was able to adopt them shortly after we were married. But we have together adopted children from India, from China, from Korea, and then from King George, Virginia, right, out of
Mhm.
foster care. So, we would be met, we'd have a child that looked obviously different than us. And people would be like, oh, what a beautiful thing that you adopted this child. And there is a beauty, there's a natural beauty that adoption legally creates, as you said, this natural parent-child relationship. But this new natural relationship wouldn't exist unless the original parent-child relationship had been severed.
Right.
And so for adoption anywhere in the world, for that child to be adoptable, the parental rights of the biological parents need to be severed. I mean, they functionally need to become an orphan
Mhm.
before they can become adopted by this new family. And in 2006, my family gathered to celebrate my father's 10th anniversary of his heart transplant. So he received a heart transplant the same year we adopted our third daughter from India. And as we celebrated the event, it was interesting to note the parallels between an organ transplant and an adoption. And as I said, the first commonality is that it's an unnatural act, right? To take a person from another family and plunk them into this new family, I mean, that's not natural. But it does create this natural relationship, right? Whether it's this new heart that's beating in someone's chest, or this new child that's part of your family, that's a natural relationship. But lastly, the third part was that it demands that a price must be paid. And you were sort of alluding to this, like, so the child is now a natural part of the family, but they don't automatically start acting like that part of the family.
I guess that's what sanctification comes in.
There you go. Next week it'll be we'll touch on it a little bit today, I think, but because you really can't look at them, without touching on the others. But yes, that's right.
Well, let me ask you this question. Had anyone ever asked you this question? Did you want to have children of your own? And if you were asked that, how would you answer that question? And especially with the adoption of all these children that you've adopted.
Yeah, that subject has definitely come up more than once, and I can understand when a parent, you especially watch a mother or father with a little baby, and what do people say when they look at that baby? Oh, it looks like, right, the father,
Right.
looks like the mother. Hopefully, it doesn't look like the mailman, right? I mean,
Right.
it resembles somebody in
Right.
that lineage. And you'll see, oh, I see Aunt Irma, or I see Uncle Ray, or whomever. You make these connections, and while that's wonderful to see that kind of physical representation, a physical similarity, when it comes down to it, there's not much satisfaction in knowing your child physically looks like you if they don't have your character,
Right.
if they don't
Exactly.
demonstrate, what you love, what
Right.
you, or hate what you hate. So without that connection, it's really empty. So Lisa was not able to have children when we married, and so it was really a foregone conclusion, and I was able to just accept that and move on.
Mhm. Uh, in Russell Moore's book, he talks about adopting these two boys in Russia, and when he did it, him and his wife had to go to Russia to talk to the judge, and they were able to take pictures of these boys, but they had to come back and not pick them up and bring them back on the same trip. And so when he had the pictures of them, people kept asking him the same questions: are they related?
Yeah.
And he really, in his book, gets really upset with these people because they keep asking this question: are they related? Like, well, of course they're going to be related. They're brothers. They're adopted. They're
Yeah.
related. But they thought that, people think that if there's um, this DNA relationship, that tightens this relationship up better than one that's not a natural relationship. And how would you answer that question?
Yeah, so that is a good question, because we tend to measure things based on what we see, and to go back to the analogy of from a biblical perspective, right? I mean, there is a sense in which all of mankind are sons of God. They are created in the image of God. They are image bearers of that God, and yet without the Spirit of God to give life, I mean, they are dead in trespasses and sins. And so, I mean, there is this parallel there that runs through, that what we really want is a child that wants to walk in our ways, that
Mm.
wants to follow our footsteps. And so the DNA, while there's a lot more to be said on this.
Yeah,
The DNA does give you certain advantages and
right.
disadvantages.
I,
And
I think that when you think about it, is that I think when, especially being a father of three children myself, and then having 10 grandchildren, there's a sense that, you know, technically, like, your line is still going on into eternity. But the thing that you realize, what you've just mentioned, I want to emphasize it, is that what you really want is you want your kids to walk in godly character. That's the most important thing that you want your kids to do. That's what you're trying to teach them. You're praying for them that they'll be transformed into the image of God. And when it gets down to it, you're more concerned about that than that they're actually your
yeah,
blood. I mean,
no,
when you get down to it.
so I had to wrestle with this early on, right? So there is this sense of the family name, right? And that I think for some cultures it's more important than others. But to realize that, okay, I have two sons, they will carry on that family name,
Mm.
although, you know, it bears no resemblance to the roots that are back in Sicily.
There's no red
Um,
hair.
that's right. But when you make the biblical connection and you realize what is the Great Commission? You know, Jesus said, make disciples, right? As you are going, make disciples, baptizing, teaching, right? So the making disciples, and this is where the ministry of abundant comes in, is I don't want people to feel like, well, I'm not called to adopt children, or I'm not called to be a foster parent. We are all called to make disciples in Christ Church. And so
Right.
that really is the process that we want to embrace. And you know, it's the name Christian that we want to bear. And that's the name I want my children to carry on.
Right.
Not so much Capitano, as
Right.
wonderful as that heritage may be. I want them to carry on the name Christian. And likewise, those that I meet that I can motivate or encourage or invite to trust Christ, I want them to carry that name Christ.
Right. Let's go to the second slide, if I do this right. So you had this corollary for the behavior is not an identity, nor shall I use behavior as a means to seek approval. Did you want to say something about that before we go on to the second point?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. And you know, right, behavior is what we see, and that's the thing we tend to judge people on. We judge them based on performance, because it's easy to judge someone on performance.
Right.
You know, we know Ephesians 1 verses 5 and 6 that it's in love that he predestined us to adoption as sons through Jesus Christ to himself. Why? According to the kind intention of his will, to the praise of the glory of his grace, which he freely bestowed on us in the beloved. But you know, then there's some verses, so that speaks of all grace, obviously, but then there's some verses that you hear, like 1 Corinthians 6:9, where it's like, or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? And you know, that's almost like somebody walking into the room that carries a lot of authority, and everybody's, you know, ready to sit up straight and pay attention, and you get worried because you think, well, wait a second, now my behavior matters. It is something that's important. But then I have to ask myself, well, the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God. So how do I be righteous? Well, it's not by trying harder. It's not by doing more. Because Romans 3 verse 21 says, apart from the law, the righteousness of God is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ. So behavior matters, but it's only because it shows where my trust is.
Right.
And
Now,
as I'm deviating from the law, it's just demonstrating I'm not trusting Christ.
right.
It's not the basis of my adoption.
Right.
But it does show, am I following after Christ? Am I trusting in my Father? So adoption is a one and done, but subjectively, right, it takes a lifetime to appreciate that.
Yeah. You know, because we live in a fallen world, and there's certain conditions that make things even more difficult. Like when you adopt a child and there's an attachment disorder. You know, I had a daughter that suffered from being bipolar, and these are really difficult issues because it's not a simple task to be able to correct your child and say, well, stop it.
Yeah.
It's not like that. In fact, when you have to deal with someone that's bipolar or somebody that's got an attachment disorder, you almost have to do the opposite to try to get to where people are saying, why are you doing that? That doesn't seem like that would work. Well, you know, when you're having to deal with someone who it seems like there's a short circuit somewhere in their behavior because of a chemical imbalance or because of something that happened to them when they were in the crib and they were crying and nobody came to them, and now they've got this problem that where you want to be able to have them behave, you realize they're unable. I mean, they're
Yes.
unable to do these things without having to do a lot of work. And to get them to be able, this is going to be a difficult task for you to be able to try to work through these issues to try to help them so they can act, in a way that's, acceptable in behavior. But that doesn't, even though they're having difficulty, you have to still love that child to help them to get through that. I mean, if you could comment on that for a second.
Yeah.
I know we're going to
Yeah.
look at the grace and truth model later, but
Yeah. No,
just
no,
give you
no.
a little preview of it.
Absolutely. No, you raise a great point. Right? We mentioned the DNA earlier, right? So there is certain, we'll call it baggage, for lack of a better word, that every child comes with, and there's their the genetics, but then there's also the environment, and some children are, you know, they have certain limitations, they have certain things that are working against them right from the get-go in their DNA. Others, their environment, right? Even a traumatic birth can
Mhm.
leave lasting effects. So there's, there are these limitations, and you know, Romans 8:15, Paul gives us this really interesting contrast, right? It speaks of sonship, it speaks of, crying out, Abba, Father,
Mhm.
but it also gives you this contrast of not returning to slavery. So, like, what does slavery have to do with being a child of God? Well, it has everything to do if I'm not a natural, right, biological child. I have this other history, this other past, these other factors that are playing in to my life. And like you said, um, that child that's struggling for whatever reason doesn't need to be told, try harder, do better. That's the
No,
last thing they need.
no,
They need to recognize and feel that connection
right,
to the parent. Now, that said, you don't do that by throwing out all the rules. I mean, there has
right,
to be structure.
right.
Um, but yeah, that's a very hard
Well,
challenge. But
so,
look at how the Lord perseveres with us,
oh, that's what I was
and
just going to say.
we're all problem children.
Right. The thing is, the problem is we don't think that we are. That
Yes,
becomes our problem because we
yes,
think, we look at a child and we see what the child's going through and we go, oh, we're not like that. But if you sat there and
yeah,
reflected over your life, over 24 hours and saw how you didn't do the things that you probably should have done, that you could have done
hmm,
better, and realized that you're not any different from these children that are having all these difficulties. It's just the
yes,
magnitude of it.
yeah,
That's what the thing is that that's the whole thing. So your second point, and maybe we've already talked about this already, but understanding the adoption is the key to understanding the gospel. And I think that what we just have talked about probably here in the last 5 minutes has a lot to do with that. If you understand the difficulties of adopting children, then you can understand how the whole gospel thing works because adoption really is the gospel.
yes, yeah, amen. The good news of the gospel only makes sense if we recognize the depth of the bad news. So, the tragedy of the fall of mankind required a rescue operation of divinely immense proportions. And this is God's unilateral act of God, to save sinners. And we see that pictured in adoption. And it, like you said, that demonstrates the power of God to salvation.
Right. The third point is if adoption is true, sanctification is necessary. Um, Tell me about this, Sam.
So the child arrives in your home, and we had a number of situations where, I mean, just families in the church and neighbors just gathered around us and showered us with love and presents and meals, and that was all wonderful. But that's just the beginning, right? And as much as we would have liked to have thought, boy, if we just love this child and just, care for it, everything will turn out all right. That just wasn't necessarily the whole story. Justification is the basis for my right standing as an adopted child of God, but sanctification is necessary so that I can begin to act like I am part of God's family. Without sanctification, I may be the apple of my father's eye, but I bear no family resemblance in thought, word, or deed. So just because I'm adopted doesn't mean I act any differently than I did 5 minutes prior to that legal adoption when I was under whatever sort of distress that I was living in.
Yeah, when I was reading Russell Moore's book, when they were to Russia, the judge, says these are the two children for you, and then the nurse tells them what all the kind of problems that they have. They have fetal alcoholism. They've got all these different issues that are going to make their life miserable. And there's this point in the story where the Russell Moore and his wife look at each other, and she gives them okay, we prayed for this. This is what we prayed for. So we need to go ahead and she was, you almost look at this, she's going to grit her teeth because she's told God this is what she's going to do, and she's going to do it. And she goes into it counting the cost, knowing how difficult it's really going to be. But I think that well, maybe I'm wrong on this, but let me just say what's going through my head is that a lot of times that you might think of adoption in the early stages, like, this is my part to do good. But what you don't consider is that cost of what it's really going to cost you, because you don't even know what it's going to cost you when you get into it, right? I mean, you don't have any idea.
No, that's true. But I would say that's true of having biological children.
That's true
right?
too.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that people normally think that the chances are better that things might go better with their own children versus adopted children that have had some kind of trauma that's been put upon them. But I think that I think all this is really, really difficult. And I mean, it's like anything. I mean, you can get married and think everything's going to be fine, and then you realize, oh, this is a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Not my own marriage, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
So you talked a little bit about sonship. Can you explain that a little bit more? I don't know if I have a sonship slide.
Yeah. So I guess that was the last point of
Yeah.
sonship being the goal.
Sonship. Yeah, I do have a sonship slide here, Sam, from your paper.
Yeah. So I mean, objectively, there's this reality that the believer is fully a child of God. I can't be any more a child of God, just like my adopted child couldn't legally be any more mine. So they're absolutely mine. But this goal of sonship, and I mean, just to be clear, the adopted child, the heir in Roman times would have been a male. So Paul, uses the word sons, but we're talking about male, female. We're talking about children of God. But nothing speaks more to the potential of what this child can be than adoption. And it's like knowing what this child was versus what this child can be. So the fact that God has adopted us, he doesn't do it simply that to see us do the right things. I mean, he wants us to be conformed to the image of God. So when Jesus said, "Enter by the narrow gate," it's interesting that as he described this gate, he said it's small, it's constrained, and it's this picture of this tightening path that more and more conforms one to the image of God's only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. So that it's the tension between, what is already, what is not yet. And Scripture just uses these terms like putting off and laying aside and putting on, pressing on, forgetting what is behind, the new man and the old man. So, sonship is what is the becoming more and more like the father, like the parent.
Right. When we think of that narrow road or narrow gate that you're talking about, I was looking and see if I can find it real quick, but it's through suffering that we enter the kingdom of God, and
Yes.
I mean, the reason why we go through this trouble is because it's the best way for God, and really it's the only way for God to conform us to the image of His Son. His Son's ministry on the earth was suffering, and I tell you from the suffering in my life that's where you see the green grass. I mean, that's where you really see the place that you can lie down and the Lord is my shepherd, is when you go through these really difficult times. And in the midst of it, it's hard to see that sometimes, but um, we always have to have our thought upon that, as difficult as adopting children are, and as difficult as it is to help them through their difficulty, this is really a wonderful thing. And even though it doesn't feel so wonderful right now, we know it really is. It really is wonderful.
Yeah.
Um,
Amen.
so the next slide. Okay, this is when we took this class and you presented this grace and truth model. Not that you didn't explain it really, really well,
Yeah.
but I thought Lisa probably did a better job of explaining how this really, really works through her experience of grace and truth, and how difficult this really is. And it was just wonderful to hear Lisa to be able to explain it that time in class. So if you could just give us a little bit of depth here on the grace and truth model.
So I'm probably not going to explain it as well as Lisa did anyway. But I mean, as you look at it, you see the fulcrum in the center, and you see this balance of what is grace, what is truth on either side. And it does look like a balancing act. And I think practically speaking, there is this sense of seeing one start to come out of balance and trying to push down on the other side. And in our human nature, that's what we're constantly doing. And you could put different things on the opposite sides of the fulcrum. You could put relationship and behavior. So I have a relationship to my child, but then I also have these expectations of behavior. I could put believe and obey. I could put heart and doctrine. I could put nurture and structure. And they're two concepts that seem to be opposed, but they need to be fit together in order to do this well. So with regard to parenting, child development specialist Dr. Karen Purvis said children need a healthy and consistent balance of nurture and structure. So nurture, the affection, the compassion, the mercy, but they also need structure. They need rules, they need limits and boundaries. So we need to understand that the both, it's a both and, it's not an either or. And where does this come into play, scripturally speaking? I mean, we know that the Lord Jesus Christ is the Word became flesh, and He dwelt among us. We beheld His glory of the only begotten Father, full of grace and truth. So He is full to the fullness of grace and truth. When I push down on the grace side of things, and I'm too much grace and not enough truth, then we're living in this world of false peace, and people get to do whatever they want, and there's no boundaries and there's no limits. And so truth really has been cast away, and grace isn't really grace.
Right.
But then when I push down on the truth side, and I want to come down on the black and whiteness of what's right and what's wrong, then I end up on the self-righteous side of the world, and I end up with legalism, and there is no grace except for me. I still want grace for myself,
Right.
but I won't have it for anybody else.
When you explain this model, this is the same day that you showed us the video that Karen Purvis had about how to implement this. Because you saw these children that really were having behavior problems, and how she was responding to them. And I tell you that watching that Karen Purvis video probably had, I mean, there's certain things that you go back in your life and you think, man, I had never thought about it that way
Mm,
before. And and I can see why you've talked about her so much, and she's a late Karen Purvis at this point, but
mhm.
the work that she did to be able to help families with these children is just remarkable, because she really taught them how to do this grace and truth, but
Yeah,
to show them what that really looks like. And I think that's probably the problem, that where you can talk about this model, but you really need to have it exhibited before you in real flesh and blood, that you go, oh, that's what it means. Because until you can actually see it,
yeah,
this is one of these things that, I mean, I would never gotten it, of what she was trying to say, unless I saw her actually grab these children, and how she hugged them, and how she helped them. I think one of the most difficult things I remember watching in that film, or in those videos, where the lady's talking about, all I wanted to do was to help my child, and
mhm,
all I do is seem like to be doing all the wrong things to help my child. And then
mhm.
she was taught how to really help her child to get through there. And then they had victory. Uh, uh, I should say, I hate to use victory, because victory is something like you could lose, but she saw obedience in her children,
Mhm.
that helped her to realize that there is a way to help them to respond in the right way. It's not easy, but you can get them to respond in the right way, and then you might have to start all over again. But it was, anyway, that I thought that I probably should try to put that link up on our Sunday school material site, so if people want to take a look at that, they can actually see what this grace and truth model looks like in real life.
No, that's a great point. And so the difficulty, I think, for Lisa and I, and probably for most parents, is we read the scriptures and we see things like you know to we read things about parenting, right? But we interpret them based on our experiences,
Right,
right? Because we had we had a father and mother,
right,
and giving all of our parents the benefit of the doubt, they did the best they could with what they had, and yet that's those experiences are how we interpret um, how we're supposed to parent. So, like you said, having a model of how to do that um, was critical. But I would say we found that model too late, and we spoke about regrets early, before we started the tape, and I just I sometimes look back and think, oh, if I only knew what we know now, it could make a difference. But if we can make a difference in somebody else's life, then that's that'll be good enough.
the next slide we had here was the nurture and structure slide. Um, did we speak to this already, or is this something else you still want to? Oh, I think this is good.
Yeah. So yeah, this definitely speaks um, to like grace and truth, to seemingly opposite but really complementary um, needs for how we parent. And as you look at yourself, you look at your spouse, you're going to probably find one that tends toward the nurture side and one that tends toward the structure side.
And I would
And
guess that usually the man's towards the structure and the woman's towards the nurture.
so it depends. But you almost always have one or the other. And how do we as parents tend to work through problems? Like we think cooperation is I get what I want and then you get what you want, and as long as that balances out, we're okay. But that's not how unity works. So
Right.
what Lisa and I would do inevitably is she would overstructure and then I would over nurture, interestingly enough. And
Mm,
that doesn't produce a balance.
no,
That just breaks both sides, and
no.
and you lose the whole thing.
Uh,
So so the so that is something first, reflecting on what is my desire. I might see nurture as important, but I also need to recognize structure is just as important. The two are equally important. So the challenge for every parenting couple is coming to a unity
Right.
On that.
Yeah, I was going to say you don't even have to have adopted children for this. This
Yeah.
has applicability universally on
Yes.
everything. This is
Yeah.
a
And
really
the
great.
last, the Proverbs 23:26, what does the parent want? And
Right.
what does our Heavenly Father want? Right? Give me your heart, my son.
Right.
Let your eyes delight in my ways. We delight ourselves in the Lord so that He would give us the desires of our heart.
As we heads toward the end here, I have this slide that I took from, this is your Adopted for Life slide that we now call, I guess we call Abundant, our ministry in our church for adoption. And I think that, now I could be wrong, but I'm just going to ask you this. I mean, I think that you had one vision for adoption when you first started, but this vision has gotten so much bigger now. That's what this ministry is really catching, is a vision that you have. And I think that is of Kenan Miller, to be able to make adoption a bigger thing than just one particular family, that this is something the whole church is involved in supporting adopted families.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So so you love biblical Greek, right, Skip?
Right.
So you know where the word hospitality or love of strangers comes from, philoxenia, and it's the compound word stranger or foreigner and love, and it shows up as the Apostle Paul is getting into the final section of his letter to the church in Rome, and he explains that our spiritual service of worship to the living God is to present our bodies a living and holy sacrifice. And then midway down the chapter, he says, let love be without hypocrisy. And then he gives some examples of how to contribute to the needs of the saints and practice hospitality. And so Paul's casting a wide net here. I mean, contributing to the needs of the saints is talking about inside the church, but then practicing hospitality really is looking at outwardly into the community. And that's really the mission of Abundant. You mentioned with regard to sanctification and the connection to suffering, right? So this presenting our body as a living and holy sacrifice, you can't be on that altar without feeling some pain, right?
Right.
There's no way. And so the living sacrifice, as it's been said, wants to get off the altar, wants to get out of the heat. But we endure and we push forward on that so that we can experience that sanctification, but also be useful in the kingdom of God.
I didn't think about this question before, but do you know how many adopted families we have in our church presently, or that are or have in the past adopted?
So I could think of at least half a dozen, but I'm sure there's more if I counted them all up.
Right.
Yeah.
The thing, I remember coming to New Life, over 20 years ago, and I remember going to the first missions conference, and David Livingston was there from John Piper's church, and the one thing he said about missions was, you're either a goer or you're a sender. And I think that when we look at adoption, we've kind of got the same kind of thing, that you're either adopting someone or you're supporting someone that's adopting. And there's a lot of things that the people in the church can do to help people that are adopting. And what are the I think of, I'm in my late 60s, and Darlene's not quite as old as I am. How can older people that are not going to adopt, how can they help the rest of the church when it comes to this adoption ministry?
Yeah, so I think it's actually better if someone just comes to the conclusion that they can adopt, because the families that are called to adopt, or even foster care, and I can think of, there is one couple that they're getting their first placement this weekend of a foster child. And, that really needs to be an all hands on deck kind of evolution. Like they just, whether it's two parents or whether it's parents with children in the home, whoever is in that home is going to be affected by that placement, the placement of that adopted child or foster child. So they need their full attention on that. But every person has some way that they can serve. We know that whether it's great or small, there's many ways to serve within the body of Christ. And so that family that whether they have adopted a child, whether they have a foster child, or whether they have children in the home that need an extra level of care. And so, that's why we have specifically expressed abundant as adoption, foster, and trauma care, because really that widens
Right.
the aperture out to touch just about every family.
Right.
There are needs. So whether there's a meal, whether there's an errand to be run, whether there's something that needs to be tended to, Canaan calls it wraparound support. So, you think of it in terms of the body of Christ, and, we really haven't created a new ministry. What we're doing is just expressing what is biblical, to care for one another, to love one another.
Well, Sam, I tell you what, I've really appreciated this time that you've been able to spend with us to talk about adoption. This is, I like this format. It makes it really easy to be able to ask questions and to, get to the point. And I really like having the interaction with somebody during the Sunday school class. So I've really enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it myself too, Skip. I appreciate the opportunity because it gives me a chance to think about these things more clearly.
Okay. Let me pray for us. Father, we're so thankful for adoption. We're glad that we're so fortunate and happy that you adopt us. But Father, I'm just so thankful for this these families in our church that have adopted so many. And I pray, Father, that you would just continue to bless this ministry. I thank you for Sam and Lisa. Thank you for Jonathan and Miller and all the other families that have adopted children. And I just pray, Father, that you would just continue to minister to them. Help us, Lord, as those in the church to be able to support them, whatever it may take to be able to do that. And again, I just thank you for Sam's ministry to me. He's just a brother that I love so much. I just thank you for the time that he spent with us this morning to be able to tape this. So again, thank you for this time, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.